Hello everybody! Welcome to an Inconsistent Bookworm, and hey, it's not a manga. I know I'm here to talk about something that I said I was going to talk about my last few Inconsistent Bookworms, and it's actually the reason why these have taken so long. Sorry, here's a tag. It's itchy me. So, what book is it that I am talking about that has befuddled me in a way? That, of course, is The Familiar, Volume 2. Yeah, as you can see, this is a bit of a hefty-ass book. And also, it was written by Mark Z. Danielewski. That's actually going to be important here in a little bit. Those who are wondering, well, why is this book befuddling to you? Is it just because it's big or anything like that? To break down the book, I need to talk a little bit about Mark Z. Danielewski. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I am dumb and I'm an American. Even though I know he's also an American. But I am a super dumb one. But I need to talk about him because I need to also talk about the reason why I even picked this up. And also, I need to sort of give a review of The Familiar Volume 1. Because, as you can see, there's a big 2 on it. Now, Mark C. Danielewski, I was introduced back in high school. And in fact, shortly after I got my first job out of high school, I decided to pick up his first ever book. Well, not his first true book. Fashion. It's hard to describe it. But his first book was the very famous, almost infamous at times, I don't know why it'd be considered infamous, but some people do, book House of Leaves. And I have to say, it's one of the best books I've ever read. And not written. I ain't write shit. I'm not going to go super into details about House of Leaves to try and describe the plot, because that is actually kind of doing the book a bit of a disservice, because it is a plot within a plot that's within a plot, if that makes sense. It's not for the faint of heart, let me put it that way. It's not one of those you just pick up off the rack and you're like, I want to read this. It is a book you go into because somebody has recommended it to you, because you are also probably a bit of an avid reader. Because also, much like this big thick bastard, it's not a short book. It's right around the area of probably about 700 some odd pages or so long. At least the edition I read. And it is one of those that literally from cover to cover, everything within it is important. Is the best way to describe the reading experience. It will have sometimes just one word or just one sentence on an entire page. Sometimes the words are in circles. But it never felt like it was just pure gimmick for gimmick's sake. And that is one thing that some people did want to try and call out Mark Z. Danielewski over, but I believe there was a lot more to it. And ever since then, I was like, alright, I want to see what more can he do. And I recently finally got a hold of his technically second novel, which was Only Revolutions. It's Only Revolutions. And I haven't had a chance to sit down and read it. And to be fair, that's simply because it was kind of a pain in the ass to find it. And that's also kind of one of the issues with Mark Z. Danielewski. It's just that his stuff is not always super easy to find. You have to go to like an actual bookstore or hope there's a secondhand store that happens to have it. So he's a bit of an enigma to locate. But perusing through the internet a few years ago, I heard that he was going to release a magnum opus of his own, and it was going to be a 27-volume story called The Familiar. Now, as you can, I was interested. I'm like, oh, okay, so 27 volumes. This is going to be sort of like The Green Mile on steroids. Because The Green Mile, those who do not remember back from the late 90s when it was originally released, it was released in small, kind of bite-sized formats. Like, it was like 180, 200 some odd pages, little bitty book, and then they were all compiled together. I think there was 7 originally released, or it might have been 6. pretty much they were long enough they could be their own smallish kind of book, but put together they were a larger story. This seemed that way at first, and I decided to pick up Familiar Volume 1. Never mind the fact I was like, okay, I don't know how we're going to make something that is almost this thick, because technically Familiar Volume 1 is shorter than this book. And this is, of course, like I said, it's Volume 2. So I picked it up and I read it. Read the whole damn thing. Boy, was it not great. Oh. And in fact, because of some of the issues with that, I was very hesitant going into the next volume. And I will also use some of my review of Familiar Volume 1 to describe what my issues are with Familiar Volume 2, because I'm just going to be honest with you, I can't finish the damn thing. And it's not because it's a dense subject matter, or it's because it's opaque in its way of which describe or talk about things. No, it's because of the fact that it's fucking boring. And it seems so mean to describe an author who can weave such an interesting story as House of Leaves within just one book, and it's a full story that you do not need any more supplementary materials. Technically, there is some. It says one of Mark C. Whiskey's first ever things he wrote was called the Whalestone Letters, I want to believe, and that is technically included as part of House of Leaves, at least now it's later prints. But they help to wrap up into a pretty succinct story. Familiar Volume 1, one person described it very well, I believe, on Goodreads. It's a story about a girl who gets a cat. 700 pages. Or actually over 700 pages. The first volume can be deduced down to a singular sentence about one of the main characters. And that's another issue with the book. And it's something that Mark C. Whiskey never got into when it came to his House of Leaves. Like, technically, it's supposed to all be told from more or less a third-person perspective, with the exception of another, or this main character whose name is Johnny. That worked because we felt as if Johnny is narrating it to us, because he does include some of his life experiences. He includes some of the things that are going on with him, and while he is piecing this book together himself. That worked. Here you have, I want to say it's 8 different main characters, and it all takes place from their perspective. We have characters such as, I'm going to butcher their poor names. There is Xanther. I believe that's how it's pronounced. She is probably the most relatable out of all the characters. Though in the same instance, she is also one of the most likable ones, who also suffers from, if I want to believe it's autism, because it's how they seem to describe it. It's never straight up said, which is fine. I don't mind a little vagueness. That is no problem with me. I actually really care for Xanther. I began to feel for her plight. And how it is written in the form of how somebody who has ADD, or anybody who does have I would believe autism, should be able to read it pretty easily and get, it's like, oh, okay, I get, this. I dealt with that before. Yeah, that's a pain in the ass, or anything like that. But then you get to deal with, I want to say her mother, her name is Anwar. And I believe they're supposed to be from African nations. I don't know west, east, or southern, north. I don't know which African nation. But because their names, when I kind of looked them up, they actually were African in origin. But her mother and father also technically make up 2 different characters. I want to say one is Anwar, I can't remember the other one. They are all right written, but her mother is purposely written to be this overtly poetic and very pretty much uses words for the sake of using words, something I'm not big on, but I get the idea behind it. They're all right. The father is a programmer who he's supposed to, talk really code like, is the best way to say it. But even somebody who does know a bit of code gets a little lost in his translations. And then there's also supposedly a detective. He doesn't seem to factor into the story really at all, ever. There is I think it's a Hispanic dude who's in LA, and it's this faux, like, I guess, Spanglish at times, and maybe it's realistic or anything, but coming from a very not Spanish dude, it screams a little on the nose, a wee bit racist maybe, don't know. It's like, wow, this is making me uncomfortable. There is also a guy who's in Bangkok, I believe it is. And if I seem very uncertain about my answers, it is not because I'm fear of pissing off Mark C. Daniel Whiskey fans or fans of The Familiar. Y'all know I don't really give a shit. If I piss you off, I piss you off. If I don't piss you off, cool. But my issue is that it's so opaque in how it should describe things, and characters who don't speak English as a main language, or English to them is just a mush of something they can throw out of their mouth. It's really, really trying to sit there and read through their parts of the book, especially whenever it doesn't feel like it connects to any other story. It's an issue I have with some alternate history writers. Sometimes they want to write these big, long epics and talk about all the different viewpoints of different things. Cool, that's awesome, guys. But can we not... Oh, well, I want to talk about this so we can see this perspective. Does it have a overarching... Or does it have any kind of bearing on the overarching narrative of everything? It's one of the issues that all writers have, because yes, you need to get your plot moving, and that's the biggest fucking thing that holds back The Familiar. It is 27 volumes, so you have to kind of space your plot out a bit, and that's fine. But like I even described, the first volume was able to be summed up in a single sentence, because that's how little the plot moved forward. And in this book that broke me from wanting to try and sit there and slog through it all, I read nearly half the damn book, and it's moved at not even a snail's pace. I am fine with something being a little slow, but it does need to at least move. Like, this is glacial in just how not forward it is moving. There are times whenever we have to go to Bangkok to hear this one guy, I think his name is Ting Ting. Yeah, the pre-original there, and also kinda again a little on the racist side, because he has to say everything twice. And it's this broken fucking English that reads real great English, and it seems like Mark C. Dan Whiskey wrote it after reading a bunch of poorly translated Chinese instructions to English instructions, and that's how he decided to write this guy. And because of that, it's a slog to get through his 15, 20 pages of him going on, and then you're thinking, okay, well, maybe we can move back to Xanther, the story I give a fuck about. No, I gotta go through Cholo Boy here. I'm sorry if that's a slur or anything, but that is exactly how he kind of describes himself at times. I gotta go through him and deal with his broken fucking Spanglish. And I understand and can read quite a bit of Spanish. And there's sometimes I'm like, that is not a Spanish word, and I'm pretty sure technically it's a Mexican, what's the word I'm looking for? Dialect. It's pretty much like how Americans, we have our own words that English don't use. We speak American. I don't speak English. I speak Mexican Spanish. That's fine. But there's sometimes like it's these fuck, I can't remember what it's called. And it's such a simple word, I know. But whenever they're using all these random ass words, and it's feels like it's just shoved in there for the sake of being shoved in there, and ultimately their plot does not feel like it has any bearing upon anything. That's whenever you have to break it down and go, why am I reading this? That's the biggest issue with it all. It's just that throughout most of it, I'm just screaming in my head, why am I reading this? It's not good. And that's something I feel bad about saying as such a great writer as Mark C. Danielewski can be. Like, I know he can be fantastic. He can weave an interesting, compelling story. This is not one of them. And on top of everything, the cherry on top that also ensured I'm done with this fucking book is the fact that currently there are 5 volumes. Now, some people would say, oh, well, he's trying to write them and everything. No. They are, for lack of a better way to describe it, much like how many writers will plot out their entire books beforehand, or plot out at least the major points. Mark C. Danielewski likes to do everything at once. That's fine. You can take as much time as you want to write a book. He has them all plotted out, all 27 volumes. And if last I've heard, I want to say already 8 is written. 8 is done. And 6 has been done for a while. But they're not going to release anymore. The publisher doesn't have a way to, they can't say, they're like, well, we can't keep releasing this shit. Nobody's buying it. And yeah, look at this shit. I mean, how can I tell somebody to read 27 volumes whenever in the first, or, let's say, 1,100 pages, barely anything fucking happens? A lot of the characters feel like throwaway characters. A lot of the dialogue is really difficult to get yourself into. And you are taken out of the story so often to the point to where you don't know what the driving force is behind it all. I can't recommend this to anybody. I can't say, oh, you should read it as an experiment. And I don't know what was the idea. And that's probably the biggest issue. It's like, why does any of this matter? And that's what kind of hung me up on being able to put out more manga reviews. Not that the manga reviews are most important, though they are kind of one of my higher viewed videos. But realistically, it just all has to deal with the fact that I can't say that anybody should read this. I can't say that I should be bothered to read it. It's going to be an incomplete story until he eventually is able to release them all, or unless, hopefully this doesn't happen, if he were to pass away and he has it all written, just it's released supplementary. But no, do not read this. This is not a good story. But I will say this much about the entire thing. It is an interesting thought experiment. And it reads more like Gatsby than I think that Mark C. Danielewski really wanted to think of himself as. It's meant to be an art form in a book that's more about its stylistic choice. And those who do not know anything about the book Gatsby, it was an English written book that had no usage of the letter E. No, just society wanted to do it. So, fuck it. That's the best way to describe it. Just fuck it. Nope. If you are an absolute, diehard that wants to read something good, a little bit avant-garde, a little bit different, and also thought-provoking, read House of Leaves. Don't read this. This is a waste of your time. Not only because unfinished story, but also in the fact that the volumes within them do not feel like they are consequential to the entire overarching narrative. Maybe it is, but we need to get there a lot quicker than 1100 fucking pages. So, hey, that's the reason why Inconsistent Bookworm got a little bit put on a back burner. But we need to actually talk about some manga soon. So, join back up with me here in just a few minutes, and I'll give you some thoughts on some other mangas, or something a little bit shorter and easier to read. So until then, everybody, I'll see y'all later. So, bye-bye, everybody.